Hello, welcome to this Crypto Professor update video on Bitcoin. It's been a while since I have posted a technical analysis video on Bitcoin, and I thought it prescient just because we have had a new all-time high in the last few days for Bitcoin achieving over $65,000. Now, that was short-lived, and we are now underneath that all-time high and testing lower. And I thought it a good idea to give you an update on what I think is going to happen over the next few days and weeks with the price of Bitcoin. Just a bit of background information for you. If you've been watching Bitcoin, you'll note that obviously it has climbed massively over the past few weeks, but also so has the entire cryptocurrency sector. We're now at a higher high in terms of the overall sector than we saw back in May this year when we achieved a $2.4 trillion market cap of the whole sector. We're now somewhere in the region of 2526 on that scale, having tested a lower low of 1.2 trillion all the way back in July. So we did have a corrective pattern, corrective wave, and we're now seeing this movement again. Okay. Now the thing to bear in mind is that this is not a graph of Bitcoin. This is a graph that represents the entire market. So we could theoretically see a drop in Bitcoin, but this does not change. In actual fact, this could move higher if, as I suspect, people start taking some profits out of Bitcoin and looking for other altcoins, which is usually a pattern that happens when Bitcoin achieves a new all-time high. However, this video is going to focus specifically on Bitcoin itself, and where that capital goes, I will provide another video at a later stage to discuss altcoin movements. However, it is worth remembering that we are at a new all-time high for the cryptocurrency sector overall, because that usually determines the amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or optimism and greed that is in the market that fuels investor psychology. So let's take a look at the overall chart pattern here. Okay, so this is a chart that goes all the way back to the beginning of 2021, when we first achieved that new all-time high that was sustained for a while. Okay, we hit a high of around about $64,000, 64,786, etc. Then we've achieved a very slight new all-time high recently, but there has been a dramatic sell-off, and we're now testing 60,000 or so. This candle is the weekly close, okay, and we've had 3 weeks of bullish movement. This candle is going to be extremely important to tell us where the movement is likely to be over the next few weeks. Now you'll notice that these 3 green candles always closed higher than the previous one. This one in particular may indicate a reverse in direction. Now, obviously, a weekly chart is a very powerful chart, a very powerful time frame. We've also got the RSI here being relatively high at 66, not quite high enough for algorithms to kick in and sell on a weekly time frame at the moment, but then most algorithms are not operating on that larger time scale. So from a weekly perspective, we have a nice wave pattern which looks a little truncated. It's not very violent. Look at the last time we hit significant resistance. We saw huge violent drop. This is a little bit of consternation, a little bit of indecision, and probably it's due to the fact that the market cap is still very, very high, and also a lot of altcoins. If we're looking at several other types of altcoins, maybe the small market caps are still exactly where they were when Bitcoin came and tested this trend line at the bottom here. Notice that in terms of the averages here, we are bang in the middle on this trend line at the moment, so we could theoretically see a retest down to this 21-week EMA, 47,000 or so, okay, in the most dramatic scenario. Now, I'm not saying that the most dramatic scenario is going to happen. In actual fact, I'm not going to focus on smaller time frames for the rest of this video. It's just worth keeping this in mind to say that, well, if we do continue our trajectory up on the weekly charts, we're going to see 80,000 or so US dollars. I suspect there's going to be a sell-off of sorts, potentially down to 47,000 or so, touching this trend line again before moving on towards 80,000. So it's a mixed picture. I'm bullish, but I'm also short-term bearish, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that on a smaller time frame for you now. So let's actually look at on a day chart, which is obviously a little bit more reliable than a week chart. Okay, we've had our peak. We had it 77 on the RSI. That was the new all-time high. Okay, if you notice, there's actually a slight convergence there. We had the all-time high previously around this level, so we actually had an all-time high here. Notice the RSI was actually lower here, 66, as opposed to 77. So that is convergence. So there was a higher high, and the RSI also indicated that was a higher high, and therefore that was likely to be sold off more likely this time than it was last time. Okay, now we've got a lot of trend lines here. This is the ultimate low trend line that I'm tracking at the moment. That says we could theoretically come down to test at the moment around about 47,000, so that does actually match up with the weekly chart that we analysed before. However, there are multiple breakpoints before that happens, the first of which is the around about $58,000. Okay, so if we do come down to that, that's the 21-day EMA on this. Then next we have the 50-day, okay, which will be around about the 0.5 fib retracement. That's around about $54,000 or so. Then we've got lower still. We've got the 0.618 on the retrace. That's 50,000. I think that's probably unlikely to sustain. If we do move low, we'll probably ricochet and hit this trend line here. I think this 0.78 is now off the cards because the trend line would have to be invalidated if that were the case, and my entire perspective would actually change if that were to drop. Notice we've got quite a lot of resistance here, two trend lines intersecting here. Okay, this bullish trend line here acting as resistance, okay, and also this one here, which was previously support, now technically turned to resistance as well. Okay, so there's a lot of resistance going on here. Obviously, achieving a new all-time high is very resistance worthy as well, okay, just purely in terms of price action, but also we have all of these conflicting sell signals basically. Okay, we have the RSI nice and high, and we've also got a lot of movement to the downside in these trend channels. So let's look technically at the MACD now, again on a day chart. Nice cross. Okay, so we've had all this bullish movement. This was very dramatic, and now we've had these crossovers. So on a day chart, this is set to fall. Okay, so another confirmation that we are likely to see lower lows before we see a return to highs. Now remember, I'm not saying sell all your Bitcoin and never come back to the asset. What I'm saying is we're seeing this. Okay, so just like we saw here with this touch of the trend line, we're probably going to come back and test this to some degree. Now, whether it's as dramatic as dropping all the way to this trend line, I couldn't say. But what I am saying is we're going to come back to some degree, $4,000-$5,000 perhaps, maybe as much as $10,000, before ultimately moving on higher and testing these upper regions here. Most likely would be the 75,000 region, then the 85,000 region, somewhere between those two. And if you look, they actually nicely represent on these trend lines. So both respectively the red and green ones here. Okay, let's see if we can find any information to refute our drop hypothesis. Let's look on a smaller chart. Okay, so this is an hour chart, and as you can see, it is poised for a drop. Every technical, in terms of averages, is actually pointing down. We've crossed over, and we're looking for a fall. In actual fact, if you look at this trend line here, this trend line has actually been broken on a day chart. So we've got a nice ascent all the way up here, really respecting this average, which is the 200-day. We broke through the 200-day around about 3 days ago now, and have been hovering underneath of this since, as people decide whether they're going to weather the storm or whether they're going to sell out ultimately. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are hoping to continue the trajectory into new price territory. But as I say, I suspect there's going to be a drop. And once again, looking for those numbers, looking for those values. If we go across to the fibs, which are the same as before, we've got 54,000, 50,000, and 45. Again, I don't think 45 is very likely. And if 45 is hit, then we are changing our strategy entirely. We're switching from a bull market to a bear market, largely overall, unless, of course, it is a fake out. So this price action here, this new all-time high, was effectively what's known as a bull trap. which is where the market gets too excited and decides to go beyond a price range, only to ultimately very swiftly correct back underneath it and hover around that region as people decide either to exit the market, short the market, or if they're feeling bullish still and ignoring all of these signals, they decide to jump in and try and push the price even higher. So let's now look on a day chart with the ADX as well. Okay, so on a day chart, okay, we're still very much we're just turning around basically. Okay, so we're still very much bullish on a day chart. So we could, if volumes increase significantly, still continue up to these aforementioned regions, the 75,000, the 85,000. However, on balance, it looks like the volume is not going to be there and the price is going to start to descend. That becomes more apparent if we look at the 4-hour chart where we've already flipped over. So this red line indicates bearish tendencies and the green line indicates bullish tendencies. And when one is on top of the other, you can generally determine the state of the market at one point. The black line is the strength of that message. Okay, that's the easiest way to think about these indicators. Obviously, on a 4-hour chart, we flipped. Okay, so this is now a bearish indicator telling us that the market is likely to descend, and it's relatively strong at 32. Okay, once again on a day chart, we've got a nice strong indicator 45, but this is lagging. Remember, okay, so this is taking into account all this data here. Okay, which is extremely bullish and neglecting this data here. Okay, on a 4-hour, this is actually taking into account this data here much more than this information here. And if we go on to a 1-hour, then obviously we're using this information a lot more. Okay, and in actual fact, look at the power of the previous movements. Okay, so when we've seen previous peaks, previous spikes in this, okay, they've been quite powerful indicators. Okay, but the red line, the bearish line, has been here for a while. In actual fact, the last time it was bullish was literally just before this peak here. Okay, so as soon as we had that peak, the sell-off was so violent that on smaller time frames we actually had the technicals completely reverse. So my hypothesis and my outlook, as I stated at the beginning of this video, is for a descent. Not a dramatic one necessarily, but a descent of sorts down from the previous all-time high, okay, and the current all-time high obviously being set recently, down towards this trend line, okay, with 3 areas of interest primarily for stopping. We've got the 57,500, call it, okay, and obviously these are ranges, they are not specific numbers. We've got the $54,000 region, and then we've got the 50,000 region, okay, depending on the volatility, okay, depending on how quickly we decide to drop, we could see all 3 of those hit very, very swiftly, or it might just stagnate and progress like this. Okay, so last time we had a nice big movement to the bullish side. We saw it stagnate over a period of a month, almost 3-4 weeks. We could get that now, okay, only for there to be another bullish wave happen probably between the end of November into December, where we could start to see much, much higher prices, $75,000 to $85,000 for Bitcoin over that time.